It was the most terrible thing he had ever seen. It was the most wondrous thing he had ever seen. Fulgrim, the Phoenician, lord of the Emperor's children, master of the Third Legion, bound with the heaviest of fetters, chemically subdued and laid naked on a cold steel gurney like a corpse bound for dissection. Fulgrim's arms were thrown up above his head, his legs spread like the Vitruvian man of old. Lucius's eyes roamed Fulgrim's pale flesh, the alabaster firmness crisscrossed in a web of surgical scars and incisions, knotted ridges that spoke of unknowable procedures and unspeakable experimentation upon the secret flesh within.
"So what do we do?"
asked Caesoren. "First, we wake him," said Fabius, stroking needle-tipped fingers over Fulgrim's chest.
"Assuming he doesn't just break free and kill us all. What then?"
said Lucius.
"We drive the creature out,"
said Fabius, with reason, with threats, and with pain.
"Pain?"
snorted Virosian.
"What pain can you administer that a primarch would feel?"
Fabius smiled, his reptilian grin that promised a host of pains he alone knew, and would be only too glad to demonstrate.
"Enough talking,"
said Lucius, snatching up a set of bladed pliers and sliding them over the middle finger of Fulgrim's right hand. With one swift, even pressure, he severed the finger at the middle knuckle, and a squirt of blood pulsed from the wound, before slowing to a drip. Fulgrim howled, but whether it was in pain or pleasure, Lucius could not tell. Fabius snatched the pliers from Lucius with an angry scowl.
"Excruciation is a precise and meticulous art, a stepped pyramid of pain," he said. "To randomly cut and maim is the work of amateurs. I will have no part in such butchery."
"Then stop talking and get on with it,"
said Lucius,
"because it sounds to me like you're stalling."
"The swordsman has a point,"
said Caesoren, looming over the apothecary. Clad in his Terminator armor, Julius dwarfed Fabius, and the apothecary nodded in acquiescence.
"As you will it, first captain,"
said Fabius, turning to his instruments.
"We shall begin with the pain of fire."
Lucius felt his pulse race as Fabius lifted a cutting torch from the bench, snapping the igniting mechanism 3 times before the flame caught. Used to cut through sheet steel, the flame sharpened to a cone of blue-hot light as Fabius adjusted the gas flow. Julius Caesoren leaned over Fulgrim and said,
"This is your last chance, demon spawn. Get out of my primarch's body and you need not suffer."
"I welcome suffering,"
said Fulgrim with bared teeth. Caesoren nodded, and Fabius brought the flame down on the sole of Fulgrim's foot. The flesh curdled, running like molten rubber as it withered beneath the incredible heat. Fulgrim's back arched and his mouth stretched wide in a soundless scream as the veins and sinews at his neck lifted from his skin like colliding tectonic ridges. Lucius watched bone rise from the melting skin as it peeled back, emerging white and gleaming for an instant before turning black. Marrow burned with a rich, fatty hiss, and the scent of seared flesh was a rich, gamey texture in the back of the throat. Lucius had smelled and tasted human meat before, but compared to that poor feast, this was an Epicurean delight. He saw the smell was having a similar effect on the others. Caesoren's molten features softened their hard edges, and Virosian held himself upright only with an effort of will. Only Fabius appeared unaffected, but Lucius guessed he had already savored many sights and smells of a primarch's body in his explorations of its divine biology. Fabius played the flame over Fulgrim's foot until all that remained below the ankle was a blackened mass of fused bone and boiled marrow that drooled to the tiled floor of the apothecarian. Julius Caesoren took hold of the charred bone.
"This suffering can all end,"
he said, regaining his composure with remarkable swiftness. Lucius licked his lips, still savoring the wondrously rich and flavorsome taste of Fulgrim's seared flesh. Fulgrim laughed. said.
Suffering is the sharp end of the whip. Not suffering is the end of the whip the master holds in his hand. Every act of suffering is a test of love, and I will prove this to you by enduring all the pain you can inflict upon me. Because I love you all.
These are not Fulgrim's words,
Snapped Kesoran.
They are honeyed lies to weaken our resolve.
Not true.
Said Fulgrim.
All the truths I've learned since taking the life of my brother have shown this to be indisputable. All things in this grand universe are linked to one another by invisible threads, even those things that appear as opposites.
Look, said Lucius.
He's healing. You have to keep up the pressure.
Fabius transferred his gaze from Fulgrim's face to his healing foot with academic interest, while Kesoran and Virosian each took up an instrument of excruciation. The battle captains took positions either side of Fulgrim and turned their devices upon the bound primarch. Kesoran crushed knuckles with crimping pliers, while Virosian worked a flesh plane across Fulgrim's chest, peeling back long strips of skin with each caress. Grinned Fulgrim.
Truly, the burden of happiness can only be removed by the balm of suffering.
Lucius smelled Fulgrim's blood and longed to take up an awl or hammer, but the look in the Primarch's eyes stayed his hand. The tortures inflicted by Kesoran and Virosian would have reduced a mortal to frothing madness, but Fulgrim appeared to be enjoying the experience. Their eyes met and Fulgrim said,
Go on, Lucius. Take up one of Fabius's devices. Make my flesh scream.
Lucius shook his head and crossed his arms for fear that he might do as Fulgrim wished. Fabius began with that most ancient of interrogation techniques, the unveiling of his many devices for excruciation and explaining of the purposes to which they would be put. They ranged from mundane artifacts, such as any fashioner of metal or wood might employ, hammers, needle-nosed pliers, nails, welding torches, awls, planes, and slow-bit drills, to more exotic implements of suffering. Nerve splicers, organ liquefiers, chakra inflamers, marrow augers, and brainstem implements.
This last device is one that will give me great pleasure to use,
said Fabius, hooking a number of metal barbs into Fulgrim's spine. The gurney upon which Fulgrim lay had rotated about its long axis, revealing flagellated shoulders and a back that was a corrugated landscape of scar tissue and healing wounds. Lucius saw an admirable devotion in the Primarch's flesh, a single-minded pursuit of pleasurable agony that only the true devotee of pain could attain.
What is it, and what does it do?
Asked Kesoran. Fabius smiled, pleased to be able to elaborate on his tool of suffering.
It is a neural parasite I have engineered from gene-spliced Xenos brain fluids and nanotech recovered from the Diasporex hybrid captains.
How insightful of you, my son,
said Fulgrim.
This is mildly diverting, I will admit. The pain to me is no more than an irritant. The pain you can inflict anyway.
Kesoran paused in his mutilations and looked up at Fabius.
Is it speaking the truth?
Fabius circled the gurney, reading the signs of Fulgrim's biorhythms with increasing puzzlement. Lucius was no apothecary, but even he could see the readouts confirmed that they might as well have been reciting poetry for all the effect it was having on the Primarch. Virosian hurled away his flesh plane, and the glass cylinder melted and the shadow alcove shattered. Noxious fluids spilled onto the floor of the apothecarian, smoking like acid and bearing an unidentifiable mass of pulsating organs grafted to a vaguely humanoid host. Whatever it was, its convulsions lasted only a moment before its wretched existence was ended. Fabius knelt beside the glistening remains and shot a poisonous glare at Virosian. Marius ignored the apothecary's anger and took hold of Fulgrim's head, leaning down as though to kiss him. Instead, he slammed Fulgrim's head down on the gurney and loosed a howl of grief-stricken rage that sent Lucius and Kesoran flying. The sound reverberated around the chamber like the sonic boom of a low-flying stormbird, shattering every piece of glass in the room. Broken shards tumbled to the tiles in 1,000 sharp tinks.
You call me evil. But how do you decide what is good and what is evil? Are they not simply arbitrary terms coined by man to justify his actions?
Said Fulgrim.
Think of how one measures good and evil, and you will see that what I am becoming, is a thing of perfect beauty. A thing of goodness.
Lucius approached the steel slab and looked down upon the primarch, sensing that his words were profound on a level he could not yet understand, but upon which his future might depend. He lifted an awl with a long hooked tip and worked it into Fulgrim's chest through scar tissue that had not fully healed. Fulgrim grimaced as the metal pierced his flesh, but Lucius couldn't decide on the emotion behind the primarch's expression.
So what are you becoming?
He asked.
You asked the wrong question,
answered Fulgrim as Lucius worked the awl into him, inch by steel inch.
Then what's the right one?
Marius and Julius leaned in as Fabius spat curses at the months of lost work that swilled and frothed around his feet.
The right question is, what does the universe move towards? And that can only be answered by understanding where we came from.
Marius followed Lucius's example and selected an instrument of torture from the collection of devices Fabius had laid out. He turned the pear-shaped device around his hands, twisting a metal cog handle that gradually spread the leaves of the pear apart. Satisfied, he returned it to its original shape and moved down the gurney to place the device between the primarch's legs.
We come from Terra,
said Marius.
Is that what you mean?
Fulgrim smiled indulgently and said,
No, Marius. Further back than that. As far back as it is possible to go.
Marius shrugged and worked his device into position with a series of grunts as Julius lifted a series of silver wands, some long, some short, but all tapered to sharpness at one end. One by one, Sauron pierced Fulgrim's body with 7 needle-tipped wands, running in a line from the crown of his head to his groin. It was clear Sauron was no stranger to the apparatus, as he attended to his work with a craftsman's diligence. Lucius wondered if he had chosen poorly in comparison to these instruments of agony, but decided that he liked the simplicity of the awl as he pressed it deeper into Fulgrim's unknown organs and inhuman biology. Fulgrim watched Sauron with the attention of a proud master watching his student take flight for the first time without instruction. The primarch shook his head as Sauron stood erect and said,
Your positioning of the Svadhisthana chakra needle is slightly off, Julius. Perhaps due to the intrusion of Marius's implement. A little higher might be better.
Sauron bent to check and readjusted the needle as he saw that Fulgrim was correct. Without a word of acknowledgement, he ran a series of copper wires from the end of each needle to a thrumming bank of generators. With the flick of the switch, a deep bass note of power filled the chamber and arcing sparks of high-voltage energy hummed from the wires. Fulgrim's jaw clenched and caged lightning danced in the black vortices of his eyes. His skin darkened and Lucius smelled the electric tang of a body burning from the inside out. Enduring enough pain to last innumerable mortal lifetimes, Fulgrim resumed speaking.
This universe began in simplicity, with an event of such rapid expansion that it cannot ever be measured. In the first fractional moments of its existence, the universe was a place of such staggering simplicity that we cannot even begin to imagine it. But over time, those simple elements began to cohere, to come together in ever more complex forms. Particles became atoms, and atoms became molecules until they grew in complexity to form the first stars. Those newly birthed stars lived and died over millions of years, and their explosive deaths fueled the birth of yet more stars and planets. You and I, we are luminous beings fashioned from the heart of stars.
Poetic. What does that have to do with good and evil?
Asked Kesoron as he manipulated the current through the silver needles, intrigued despite himself. Lucius was surprised, for he had always thought the first captain had little interest in anything other than the gratification of his own desires, or how he could wreak the greatest pain upon the enemy.
I am getting to that,
promised Fulgrim, and Lucius had to remind himself that they were in the midst of torturing him and had not come to listen to a lecture on the substance of the universe. He wanted to speak out, but Fulgrim's words held him fast.
None of this coming together is random,
explained Fulgrim.
It is all part of the universe's nature, its tendency towards complexity. Oh, yes, that is most exquisite. Marius, another turn of the screw. Now, as I was saying, all things are part of this cycle of building and coming together, from the lowliest organism to the highest functioning sentience. Given the right circumstances, everything will tend towards becoming something more beautiful, more perfect, more complex. It has been this way since the beginning of this universe's lifespan, and that nature is as inescapable as it is inevitable.
Lucius nodded and turned the awl in a wide circle within Fulgrim's body.
And where does all this lead? What lies at the end of this journey from simplicity to complexity?
Fulgrim shrugged, though it was impossible to tell whether it was a conscious gesture or the result of the current broiling his bones.
Who can say? Some have called it Godhood, others Nirvana. For want of a better term, I call it perfect complexity. It is the ultimate aim of all things, whether they are aware of their role in the universe or not. Now, the question of good and evil is inextricably linked to this ongoing journey to perfect complexity. And the answer is simple.
Fulgrim's words trailed off as his back arched and a line of blood ran from the corner of his mouth. Lucius wanted to believe it was his penetrative awl pricking Fulgrim's spine that was causing the pain. With all three warriors working their excruciating arts, it was impossible to be sure. Fabius circled the gurney, monitoring Fulgrim's vital signs with growing alarm.
"You're killing him,"
he said, urgently.
"One of you must stop,"
No,
said Marius.
the pain will drive the demon thing out. It will relinquish its hold on Fulgrim before it allows itself to die.
"Simpleton!"
Snapped Fabius.
Do you think such things as demons fear the destruction of their mortal hosts? Its essence will simply cohere in the warp once you have destroyed the physical vessel.
Then perhaps the time has come to use the neural parasite device.
Said Marius.
The thing you crafted from the Diosporax hybrid captains.
Fabius nodded in agreement, and Lucius saw the apothecary had been waiting for just such an opportunity. Bending low, he placed the half-helm upon Fulgrim's skull and attached thin lengths of clear plastic tubing to the silvered metal. The tubing coiled across the floor to a humming machine that looked to have been designed by creatures that bore no relation to humanity. It pulsed with a complex series of lights and sounds that existed in realms beyond the ordinary perceptions of mortals, and Lucius watched as the iridescent mercury-like liquid pulsed eagerly along the clear tubing and into the primarch.
This had better work,
said Kesoron, jabbing Fabius in the chest.
If you have spoken false, none of your foetid elixirs will stop me from killing you.
The sparkling liquid entered Fulgrim's body, and the gasp of a sensualist who had at last discovered some sensation as yet unimagined escaped his full lips. Fulgrim's eyes snapped open, and he looked about himself like a dreamer, awakening from golden memories of half-remembered friends and old lovers.
My sons,
he said, as though the pain of his torture was little more than the gentle caress of a butterfly's wings.
where was I?
Blood sheened his flesh like a crimson gown, and the sharp tang of roasting meat oozed from every orifice. Heat radiated along the silver needles jutting from his body, and his pelvis was bent up at an unnatural angle by the expansion of the macabre device of Marius. At last, Fulgrim's body relaxed, sinking back onto the gurney with a contented sigh of relief. His limbs settled on the cold metal, and Fabius gave a triumphant grin that exposed his yellow teeth and glistening, serpentine tongue.
"I have him," he said. "What would you have me do first, Captain?"
Can you force it to speak truthfully?
"Of course. A manipulation of no consequence,"
Fabius told him. Lucius frowned at the swiftness of Fabius's assurance, wondering at the ease with which the apothecary appeared to have mastered what he had described as being nigh impossibly difficult. He slid the all clear of Fulgrim's body and moved along the gurney to stand next to Fabius. Vitae Noctis or not, he would kill Fabius if it emerged that he was lying to them. The faces on the apothecary's long coat flexed as though rinsing and falling on a gelid tide, and their mute howls implored Lucius to end their suffering. The swordsman ignored them, calculating where best to stab with the awl if he needed to kill Fabius. The apothecary seemed oblivious to Lucius's presence, and worked his fingers over the alien device like a maestro at the keyboard of a templum organ. Fulgrim danced a jig on the gurney, and his face twisted into a delirious smile as he felt what was being done to him.
"Oh, my sons,"
breathed the primarch.
"You want the truth. How artless of you. Do you not realize that the truth is the most dangerous thing of all?"
Your time here is at an end, demon.
Snarled Marius.
You have no place among our legion. You are a thing of evil.
Fulgrim laughed and said,
"Oh, Marius, you insist on calling me a thing of evil. But such a word is meaningless unless you understand the truth of what good and evil represent. Very well. You wish the truth? I will give it to you. If you accept that the universe is constantly moving towards its final state of perfect complexity, and that this is its inevitable destination, then anything that hinders this process must be defined as evil. By that same logic, anything that promotes this ongoing journey is surely good. I am moving towards that perfect complexity, and by hindering my ascension, you are acting in the cause of evil. Alone in this chamber, I am the only thing that is good.
You seek to dull our wits with absurd talk of the nature of the universe, good and evil.
hissed Marius.
I know evil. I am looking at it.
You are looking at yourself, Marius Virosian,
said Fulgrim.
Have you not seen the truth of it yet?
The truth of what?
The truth of me!
Lucius stepped away from the gurney as Fulgrim's biceps swelled with sudden power, and his right arm tore free of the restraints that bound him to the gurney. An instant later, his left arm was free and the primarch sat bolt upright, tearing loose the needles, piercing his skin, and ripping free the biomonitors Fabius had attached at the beginning of their tortures. Fulgrim kicked Marius away and tore loose the open device the third captain had worked upon with a sigh of regret. It fell to the floor of the apothecarian with a wet clatter and rolled like a viscous flour of red-stained iron.
A pity,
said Fulgrim.
I was beginning to enjoy that.